Today, we're diving into an incredible ancient story about starting over from scratch. Imagine a whole group of people returning from a 70-year exile. Their mission? To rebuild everything: their homes, their culture, their entire spiritual center from a literal pile of rubble. Let's see how they even began to tackle that.
Think about it like this. Imagine a national quarantine, not for a few weeks, but for 70 years. And now, it's finally over. You get to go home, but home is completely destroyed. That was the stark reality for the Jewish exiles returning to Jerusalem. The absolute joy of freedom was slammed right up against the overwhelming size of the task ahead of them.
So, what do you do first? Logic would say you build walls for protection, right? Or maybe houses for shelter. But what they did first was, well, it was completely unexpected, and it tells us everything about what truly mattered to them.
Their mission kicked off in the 7th month of the Jewish calendar, a month called Tishri. Now, what's so cool about this is that the timing was definitely not random. This specific month is jam-packed with the most significant religious festivals of the entire year. We're talking the New Year, the Day of Atonement, the whole shebang. So their timing alone was a huge signal that their purpose was spiritual right from the get-go.
And the text says they all gathered as one man. Now, that's not just a way of saying a lot of people showed up. It's this powerful description of their unity. After being scattered for generations, they came back with a single heart, a shared purpose to restore their relationship with God. You could say this unity was the real foundational building block.
So this incredible unity led them to make a really surprising first move. Instead of focusing on physical security, walls and gates, they chose spiritual restoration. They prioritized worship before walls. It seems totally backwards, but trust me, there was a powerful reason behind it.
Just look at their first 3 steps. Before they even thought about laying a single foundation stone for the temple, they built the altar. Why? Well, the text says it was because of their fear of the peoples of the lands. Isn't that wild? Paradoxically, their fear didn't drive them to build weapons or walls, it drove them to worship. They believed their ultimate security didn't come from stone, but from obeying God's law and getting the sacrificial system back up and running. Okay, so after getting worship going again, they were finally ready to lay the foundation for the new temple. You would think this would be a moment of pure, unified joy, right? But the reality was way more complex and deeply, deeply human. And this slide just perfectly captures the scene. As they laid the foundation, this strange, mixed sound started rising from the crowd. The younger generation, who had never seen the original temple, were shouting for joy. For them, this was the future. This was a new beginning. But the older generation, the ones who remembered the breathtaking glory of Solomon's temple, they wept loudly. Because to them, this new foundation just seemed so small, so insignificant in comparison. The sound was so jumbled that from a distance you literally couldn't tell the shouting from the weeping.
So what on earth were they singing about in the middle of all this emotional chaos? Well, the song they sang was all about a single, powerful Hebrew word, hesed. Now, this isn't just love. It's so much more. It's God's loyal, unbreakable, I've got your back no matter what kind of covenant love. By singing about God's hesed, they were declaring that their hope wasn't in the size of a building, but in the faithfulness of their God.
And just as this complex, emotional, hopeful work gets underway, it hits its first major roadblock, and it arrives disguised as a helping hand.
The local people, who are identified as the Samaritans, come to the Jewish leaders with an offer that sounds just perfect. Hey, let us help, they say. We worship the same God you do. On the surface, who would ever refuse free labor and a gesture of friendship?
But the Jewish leaders saw right through it. This offer was a total Trojan horse. And here's the crucial part. They had the discernment to realize that while these people claimed to worship Israel's God, they also worshiped their own gods. It was a mix. And to accept their help would be to compromise the entire purpose of the temple, a place dedicated to one God and one God only. They had to say no.
And that no, well, it changed everything. The opposition dropped their friendly disguise and launched an all-out campaign to shut the project down by any means necessary.
They basically pulled out the entire opposition toolkit. It was systematic and brutal. First, they worked to discourage the people, just trying to drain their morale. They used fear-mongering to try and paralyze them. When that wasn't enough, they started bribing Persian officials to create bureaucratic nightmares. And finally, they escalated to formal, political lies aimed at the highest office. This was their masterstroke. They wrote a letter to the king of Persia that completely twisted the truth.
They reframed a religious project into a political rebellion. They said, "Hey, king, these guys aren't building a temple to worship God. They're building a rebellious and wicked city, so they can stop paying taxes and defy your empire."
And you know what? It worked perfectly. Based on this carefully crafted lie, the king did a quick check, found some past instances of rebellion, and immediately issued a decree. The work came to a dead stop. The opposition had won.
So, is that it? Is that the end of the story? A hopeful project just crushed by lies and politics? Not quite. Because the way the author, Ezra, tells this story, it reveals a much, much bigger picture.
Now, this is really fascinating. The author does something clever here. He tells the story out of order. He actually jumps forward in time about 70 years to mention this letter of opposition that was sent to a later king, Artaxerxes. Now, why would he do that? To make a point that this kind of opposition wasn't a one-time event, it was persistent, it happened across generations. Then, he jumps right back to the original timeline to show that despite this constant pressure, the temple was eventually finished under King Darius.
And this brings us to a crucial takeaway from this whole story. We so often assume that if we face opposition, we must be on the wrong track. But this story suggests the exact opposite. Sometimes, facing fierce opposition is actually a sign that you are doing something deeply meaningful and absolutely right.
So, the big picture is this. Meaningful work is often a struggle. It's a battlefield, not a playground, because anything worthwhile is going to challenge the status quo. And while opposition might feel persistent, in the grand scheme of things, it's temporary. Ultimately, this story is just this powerful reminder that despite setbacks, despite lies, despite fear, a plan rooted in faith will eventually succeed.
Which leaves us with this final thought to chew on. If great and meaningful work almost always attracts some form of opposition, how should that change the way we view the challenges and setbacks we're facing in our own projects, our own careers, and our own lives today?